Welcome to the Education Magazine again, and this is going to be quite a show, Chris, because we have spread our tentacles, our reach to Scotland.
We have, yeah, north of the border.
And we have a very inspirational person who's going to talk to you about her story and what she's done. And her name is Kaydi, and her mother is Nicole. And before I introduce you to Kaydi and Nicole, I just thought I'd tell you a little bit. Chris, tell the story about what Kaydi has been doing.
Well, I mean, as we're about to know, Kaydi herself is an inspirational young lady with diagnosis of autism and ADHD, and like many of our viewers, has experienced some challenges.
And taken a long time to get diagnosis.
Well, absolutely.
Yeah, been through a lot of the experiences that you and I come across on a daily basis, very sadly. But, and this is why it's so exciting to have her on, you know, she's now come through that and has really found some success for herself. I don't want to spoil it because I think we should hear it in her own words.
But before I introduce Kaydi and Nicole, I should also introduce my guest, who you may already know is Dame Kathryn August, a well-experienced educationalist, having worked in schools as a head teacher and having been credited with all sorts of accolades, including, of course, the Dame.
Yeah.
So, fantastic. So, Kathy, thank you for joining us. Hello. Absolute
pleasure. And I can't wait to hear Kaydi's story, because my niece is executive principal of autistic specialist provision not far from where I'm sitting now. So when I've heard Kaydi's story, I shall be telling Sarah all about you.
Brilliant.
Exciting.
Brilliant. Well,
exciting stuff.
Well, let me introduce you, the time we've all been waiting for. Kaydi. Hi, Kaydi. How are you? Thank you very much for joining us. And hello, Nicole.
Hi.
And how's the weather in Scotland today?
It's actually lovely today. Oh. So much sun up here. We're not
Fantastic. Kaydi, well, what an inspiration. Tell us a little bit about what you've experienced at school and why you set up this organisation to help so many people. Well, Nicole, you can answer if you like. Kaydi can chip in.
Yeah. So Kaydi was very late diagnosed. We had fought for a diagnosis for over 10 years for Kaydi. But by the time she got a diagnosis, she was already in high school, by which point it was just so difficult for her changing from primary school up to high school. And by the time she got a diagnosis, she was already out of school. She couldn't attend anymore. The environment was just too much for her. It was too busy, too noisy. All the changes were just so much for her. She just wasn't coping. So we made the decision for Kaydi, after a very long time of trying, made the decision for Kaydi to come out of school and to focus on our mental health and our well-being. You know, the school did try to some extent, but I think there's a lot of misunderstanding around autism, and I don't feel they really understood the difficulties that Kaydi had, especially being female. You know, that is something that you've probably heard of before, getting a later diagnosis and, you know, presenting slightly differently as well. So while Kaydi was out of school, you know, at that point, her mental health was just
Nicole, what time was this? Over what period of time was she out of school?
So she first left school, she just went into second year up here. It might be different down south. So she was 13, and it was 2 weeks after she came out of school, she got her diagnosis. But by which point it was too little, too late, really. So she came out of school at 13. She's now nearly 16.
Wow.
So she had missed 3 years of her education. And to be honest, her first year at high school, she wasn't learning because she was so just going through trauma, really, of the school environment and not getting the right support. So she's not got any high school education whatsoever. And at home, we couldn't even home educate because her mental health was just so low. She would sit reading her books. Kaydi's an avid reader. And she's got a library at home of like 300-400 books.
Really?
So she would just sit on the sofa, you know, indulging in her books to kind of block out everything that had been happening for her. And we realised at that point she couldn't get an education while she was in that situation. So we spent the next maybe about a year, 9 months to a year, just focusing on her well-being, looking at what made her happy, what made her feel comfortable, going out and doing things, and we call it unskilling. I don't know if that's a term that you use. It's just focusing on what she's good at and what she enjoys. And that really helped her mental health and her well-being. And we've seen her kind of come out of that state of mind that she'd been in. Then we kind of looked at trying homeschooling, which was really hard, wasn't it? Because that's home. It's not school, it's home.
Yeah.
We didn't follow any sort of curriculum. Kaydi just wanted an education.
The closest I got to following a curriculum was Mature.
Yeah. So we didn't really get any support from our school. It was kind of out of sight, out of mind. She'd kind of been forgotten about. We didn't really have any contact whatsoever throughout lockdown at all. She was just kind of forgotten. And that was really hard for Kaydi, to feel forgotten. So we kind of looked at what we could do at home. And we managed to find an organisation, the Donaldson Trust, who support young people with additional needs and their education. So we got some funding from them to pay for a tutor, a special needs tutor, and she did that all online. She did her maths, her English and her Spanish. So that kept her level of education where it needed to be, even though she wasn't putting in the same amount of hours. She's highly intelligent. She was very capable. So, that really, really helped her.
Nicole, what was it? Was there a difference between her experience at primary as compared to experience at secondary?
Very, very much so. Like the things that you had told me that worked at primary school but didn't work at high school was you sit in the same seat in the same classroom with the same teacher. You know what to expect. You know what's coming. You're not making any sort of transitions or changes, or there's very few of them. Kaydi went to a particularly busy primary school as well. It was busy, wasn't it? It wasn't a huge school.
I did, however, sort of miss the busiest parts.
Yeah, you kind of avoided the sort of lunch halls and all that sort of stuff. But going to high school, it was massive. Our high school was huge, and so many children. And also, I think something that was brought up by Kaydi was that Kaydi didn't feel like she fitted in with her peers at high school. By that point, young people, I think every young person changes when they go to high school. They find sort of at their own feet, and they go and they do their own thing, and they sort of grow up a lot at high school. Whereas I think Kaydi, she wasn't at that point, and she just kind of wanted to do her thing, but she was conscious that she was different, and I think that was hard for her. And again, you probably realise masking. Kaydi lived in a mask. They didn't see the real Kaydi at all. Kaydi is actually very loud and bubbly and full of character, but we kept hearing how quiet and well-behaved she was, when actually Kaydi was traumatised. She wasn't quiet and well-behaved. She couldn't function. She would shut down, and that sort of fight or flight, but for her it was the kind of just freeze, and she would never put her hand up and ask to leave the class or anything like that. She would endure what she was going through.
And am I right, Kaydi, that is really quite exhausting when you're having to mask all the time, because you can never relax, can you?
It's like when you get home, you just sort of collapse on the couch.
That's right.
Like hiding so much.
Yeah.
Definitely. And you would find you'd come home and be quite upset. But she wouldn't even herself know why. I didn't know at first either. She couldn't explain it. She couldn't put it into words. And I think that was something that you struggled a lot with, was explaining how you were feeling. She couldn't associate the words to feelings, if that makes sense. And then by the time that, she did, she was hysterical in the car, dropping her off at school one day. There's a lot of procrastinating before school. There was a lot of avoidance.
Not the usual sort of avoidance.
Kaydi's very good at avoiding stuff that's not fun. But this was more, I started to see, okay, something must be going on somewhere for you to really... She never once said, I don't want to go. She would never do that. There's rules and you have to follow them.
Mm.
She knew, I have to go to school. But she would have done anything to not have went, taken up to 2 hours just to put trousers and a t-shirt on, but then obviously, like I say, one day dropping her off, she was just absolutely hysterical in the car, and it just overflowed by that point. There was no more sort of trying to contain it. She just wasn't able to. And we drove around that day, didn't we, just let's just go for a drive, let's just talk, let's just find out what's really upsetting you away from the school building. And, so we drove away and we did that. And that was the kind of start of not going back. We did attempt for Kaydi to go back a few times, but there was certainly a lot of misunderstanding, unfortunately, with her school. They didn't see what we've seen. They've seen, an intelligent, quiet, calm girl with no additional needs, really, when actually there was so much going on under the surface. And we don't necessarily expect people to know what's going on. If they don't have that experience, or people in their family, they might not know or understand. But I think there was an expectation that they would listen, and that didn't happen for us, unfortunately. And that was hard for you. You just wanted someone to listen, didn't you? Yeah.
Nicole, you mentioned that you kind of, as matters progressed, as you say, went into lockdown, you then got that tutor. Is that, and Kaydi, it's nice to see you kind of interacting. We can see that smile, that kind of bubbly personality your mum has mentioned coming through as we're talking to you. But Nicole, was that when things started to change for the better? Do we start to see more of the real Kaydi coming back out?
Yeah, I think our tutor was definitely part of that. The tutor that you had, she works in a special school, so she had knowledge, but she didn't come in saying that she knew Kaydi. She has that experience, but she was all about getting to know Kaydi, and that's what Kaydi needed. And I think that is a problem sometimes. Speaking to professionals, there is this one size fits all for autism, and it just doesn't work, unfortunately. So getting that additional needs tutor who literally just wanted to get to know Kaydi at first and chat to her. There wasn't any pressure. There wasn't any, right, sit down, we're going to do this. It was all just chatting about Marvel and Supernatural and, all these things that Kaydi enjoys. And you built up a friendship with Alice, didn't you? And it's actually, she still had Alice all the way up until just a couple of months ago, when we kind of felt we've got to that point now where obviously Kaydi is now in a new provision that's amazing, which we're happy to talk about. But Alice seen Kaydi through all of that, and it was more than just tutoring. She was a friend to Kaydi, someone who understood, someone who listened. And I think being at home and being around people that understand her needs, know when to give a little nudge and when to step back, and having everything that you needed. Like, what was your most favourite thing when you were out of school? What did we have before it broke?
We had an indoor swing, but it broke twice.
So Kaydi loved being on this swing, something so simple, but she could sit and do anything that you asked her to do academically, sitting on this swing. The motion of just swinging back and forward kept her so calm. She would sit on it for hours, but you'd get so much from Kaydi because she was calm, she was focused, and it seems like such a simple thing. But even things like having our sensory toys, that was a massive thing for you, which you've got loads with it in front of you, haven't you?
I can see some of those toys now. You're showing. Show us some of your toys, Kaydi.
I have a popper and a slug.
Oh, I like the slug.
I do like that. I think I saw something else too. I thought I saw.
Oh, here we go. Was it?
Oh yeah, that's good. Yeah.
That's one of my favourite ones.
I'm sitting playing with the little marble.
You.
Oh,
Are they all different textures as well?
Some of them are fluffy, some of them are squishy, some of them make noises.
Yeah.
But Kaydi, someone tells me that you're a bit of a celebrity too, because you've been on Channel 5, haven't you?
Yeah.
And since then, Nicole, I think since then, she has been talking to many people about the problems of typical schooling. Is that right?
She has, yeah. So while Kaydi was out of school, just to give a bit of context around it, while Kaydi was out of school, she was, when things got better for Kaydi, she's like, she met so many other young people going through exactly what she was. A young man who had went through primary school with her and through the start of high school with her. He was also ended up out of school just 2 weeks before Kaydi. Their sort of journeys are very, very similar.
One of my friends left a couple of weeks after me.
That, yeah. So all these people she was seeing around her having the same difficulties, and she was so passionate about not wanting them to go through what she had. And you know, for Kaydi, once she had got to a better place, she was like, what can I do? What can I do to help? You know, and Kaydi at the time, how old were you? Were you 14 at the time, 13? I'm losing track of time now. Yeah, so you just were 13, yeah. So she decided to do some fundraising initially, and she donated a lot of money to local charities that had supported her while she was out of school, such as the advocacy service that had supported her through tribunal. She also supported the Yard in Edinburgh, which is somewhere we used to go that she loved, and also a local charity called Signpost, who supports families with children with additional needs. And Kaydi had raised thousands of pounds for these charities. And then she came to me one day saying, you know, what could I do if I raised this money? How could I help people more directly? Because that was helping, but you didn't feel it was specific enough, did you? It wasn't specifically helping people that had went through what Kaydi had. And that's when we kind of did a sort of homeschooling project, if you like, where we said, okay, what do you want to focus on? What can you have and sell to raise funds? And then we'll look at how you can use those funds to help people. And that's when all the sensory toys came into it, because she loves sensory toys. And they'd seen her through. They'd seen her through some of her hardest times. So we started researching and we found some suppliers. And then I got to work teaching Kaydi how to help build a website and how to set up, if you like, a sort of business.
Found it with advertising. First time I ever went near social media.
Yeah, she wasn't a fan of social media before, and now she sees how powerful it is.
It was confusing before.
Yeah, it's a bit confusing sometimes, isn't it? So she set that up, and you know, it was really sort of a sort of small goal, if you like, of redirecting where the funds were going. And she knew that she wanted to set up support socially for these young people, because you know, she can't set up a school or anything like that, but she could set up somewhere that they could all meet each other and not be so lonely. They were out of school, they struggled with friendships, so she wanted to bring everybody together, similar, like-minded young people together. So when you set up your website, you launched it in April last year. She's just celebrated her first anniversary for Diversified. And do you want to share about what you've used all that money on that you've raised? Yeah, you can do that part.
I used the money I raised to create social groups that I started in, was it January or February?
They started in January.
January, yeah.
And you're more than halfway through your first one, aren't you?
Yeah. I just done an Easter one as well.
Just ran an Easter activity club. And you got amazing feedback for both of the groups that you've run. And then you've got a new service that you're developing just now, haven't you? And this new service that she's setting up is very specific. It's where she wanted to get to originally, was supporting those who can't attend school full time like she couldn't. And it's called Aspire. And do you want to share what it's about?
Okay. It's similar to a sort of social meetup sort of place, but there is access to sort of educational resources and mental health support and stuff. So as well as making friends, they can sort of get help with other things as well.
Yeah, so it's a bit more well-being focused to support. What Kaydi and I realised was, even though I'd taken Kaydi out of the school situation where it was safe and she was calm, she wasn't in a place to engage with her education because her well-being and mental health had suffered. So this service in particular is to support the well-being and mental health alongside providing educational resources for these young people.
So is this virtual, or is it? Don't worry. Is it virtual or face to face?
Sorry, I can't hear you.
The activities, are they virtual or face to face?
No, they're going to be face to face.
Right.
So our social groups and the Easter group we've ran is a mix of online and, sorry, got a little brother running about in the background.
Just see a little head.
Yeah, so she's at that point now where she is kind of getting her goal, her dream, and and that is to really reach these young people who they're falling through the cracks, really. You know, a lot of them maybe don't fit the criteria for a typical specialist provision. And it's really just a sort of safety net where we can support their well-being. And then, you know, when they're ready to re-engage with education, that they're in a place that they can. So that's kind of, you're at that point now. So she's only been doing it a year, and she's had amazing response for what she's done. And it's already changed things for a lot of young people that have participated in it. And we've had some amazing feedback, haven't you? Yeah. So, yeah.
I'd also like to welcome Charlotte Hadfield, who, again, is you're very well familiar with. Charlotte Hadfield is a barrister practicing out in London, doing education cases all the time. Charlotte, lovely to see you.
Lovely to see you too. Hello, Kaydi. Hello, Nicole. Hello, Kathryn.
Hi.
Hello.
Charlotte's been part-time, obviously, in this episode. So, you know, we've already been enjoying a lot of Kaydi and Nicole's case, but it's been a fascinating story that you'll have to catch up on yourself, Charlotte, on Facebook and YouTube once it's published. But Kaydi, one of the things that your mum mentioned is that now, you know, following that kind of long journey, as you say, that kind of break from formal education and the tutoring, you're now back in a provision. Is that right? And that seems to be going well. Do you want to tell us a bit about that?
I go to a place called Vibe, and that's the Donaldson School, and it's sort of aimed for like high school age, but it's like really small numbers, and we do arts and crafts. We have a maths tutor, an English tutor, and we sort of just, whenever we're like ready to go and do like education related stuff, we can go and do it. And when we're not in the mood, we can sort of go and do something else, and pretty chill.
And you've got a swing there now as well. Kaydi's got a swing there.
was that at your suggestion, Kaydi? Were you saying, I definitely want to swing?
I've done maths on that swing.
Yeah, you do maths on the swing, don't you?
And Kaydi, I think at the Vibe, people who are instructing you are not called teachers, are they?
No. We either call them by their names, or when like they're like meeting parents and stuff, we're like, it's the maths tutor.
Yeah. Oh, lovely.
There's not a feeling of school at Vibe, is there? There's not. It's very sort of sensory wise, it's very calm. There's not lots of things covering the walls. It's all quite calm and relaxed.
Unless you're looking at the whiteboard of what's going on during the week.
Yeah, so they put things up on a whiteboard so the children know what's happening, but it's not like a timetable, so they don't have to do these things. It's up there so they know what's available, and if they want to take part, they can. If they want to go in a room on their own and just chill, they can. And the needs of the children are all very similar. The service is quite, I would say, unique, certainly up here. It doesn't feel like a specialist school, and it doesn't feel like a typical school. It's just so relaxed. You know, there's not like a big dinner hall, you know, it's nothing.
We've literally been eating lunch in the art room. That's just not the biggest table.
Yeah.
How long can Kaydi stay there? Does it go through to 18 or is it 16? Goes to 18.
Yeah, so at the moment, Kaydi was the very, very first person to get a place in Vibe, and we had to go to the tribunal to get that place. It was refused, and it took us about a year to go through tribunal, and Kaydi was the first in that service. There's now, how many? About 10-ish?
I lost track because people keep joining.
Yeah, there's been quite a lot of people joining recently. A lot of people have used Kaydi's case as a test case, and we've been supporting other parents as well as to how and why we won Kaydi's case. Obviously, everybody's individual, that it won't all be the same, but there are certainly aspects of it that would help other people. As far as we know at this moment in time, Kaydi is still the only one that's won at tribunal from West Lothian. The other ones that are placed there are from Falkirk and Edinburgh. So unfortunately, the council still are not placing young people there. But we do hope that will change. We do hope that.
What's the objection that you know that they are raising?
So for us, and probably for a lot of them, is cost. They're not looking at the specific needs, and they're looking at what it's costing. But for Kaydi, to go to Vibe, Kaydi in particular, for the hours that she goes. And so Kaydi's nearly full-time. She goes 4 out of 5 days. And that was because originally Kaydi was doing a college course on a Friday, so she didn't need to go on a Friday. And the difference between educating her in the current system and compared to Vibe is actually only £6,000 of a difference per year. So it's not as much as what they put in the documents, which was, you know, sort of £30,000.
Yeah.
And obviously there's not any difference from where they wanted to place her within council services to where she is now with regards to transport. Both were pretty much exactly the same costs, because where they were going to place her wasn't next to us, it was further afield on West Lothian. So the only difference in the end is about £6,000, and the tribunal, obviously, for that part of it, it said that that was, you know, a fair amount for the needs that Kaydi has to go to that provision. And I think it boils back to, you know, we don't like to use functioning labels. I don't think it's necessarily the greatest thing to use, but obviously Kaydi doesn't have any sort of learning disabilities or anything like that. She's highly intelligent, but just because she's intelligent doesn't mean that she can do everything that other young people her age can do easily. It's a bit difficult for her. So what the education system is missing here is that these kids, you know, might seem on the surface that they're intelligent and they can cope, but we're not talking about their intelligence. We're not talking about academically. We're talking about the environment. We're talking about their needs. And there isn't a provision like Vibe, you know, certainly here, where it is focused on those particular young people. You know, there's other services for young people that have learning disabilities. More specialist skills, typical specialist skills cater for that, but there's not a service that caters for young people like Kaydi. So Vibe is very unique, and it's been such a positive thing for Kaydi. She started in September last year, and she's doing amazingly. You know, she's just completely different young person, child, you know, from what, I don't want to call you a child because you're nearly 16, young person. It's completely different. You know, our mental health, our well-being has been their focus. They didn't bring her in there and try to educate her with a whole curriculum. They just focused on her and what she needed.
Kaydi, what are you hoping to achieve through Diversified? This is the program that you set up. What's the ambition moving forward? What are you hoping to do in the future?
Do you mean like goals?
Yeah, your goals.
Yeah. Well, the main one for me is to get a sort of like a building to sort of do social groups at, and to have a permanent sort of sensory safe space. So that's like my main thing.
Yeah. So Kaydi struggles to kind of think too far ahead. It's a bit too open-ended for her.
Yeah.
So her goals for the next sort of 6 to 12 months they're already sort of on the way there already, is to have a premises in the community, a safe space for young people, neurodiverse young people to go, you know, for if it's social, if it's to somewhere for them to go and do schoolwork because they can't do it at home. You know, we've got lots of sensory stuff already to create a proper sensory space that isn't available where we are, that people can come and visit and use. And something else that we've kind of missed that Kaydi also does is that Kaydi donates small sensory safe space packages to other charities and organisations. So she raises funds, puts together like a sensory tent and lights and sensory toys, and then donates them to local organisations so that these organisations have a sensory safe space for young people visiting. So for Signpost, for example, which is an organisation through here, they support families with children with additional needs. And, you know, they don't have anywhere for these kids to just sit and be calm. It's an office type environment. So this gives them the opportunity to create this little sort of nook, this area in their offices, so that these young people can be calm when they're visiting.
So Nicole, is the aim also to set this up as a charity?
Yes, so we're already in the process. It is a long process and there's quite a backlog. I think everybody wanted to set charities up during lockdown, so there is a bit of a backlog. But we're hoping to have that in the next couple of months, that we'll be registered as a Scottish charity. And once we have our charitable status, I kind of feel like the world's an oyster, that she's just going to steam ahead and grow. You know, there's nobody really doing what Kaydi's doing. And I think it's really special special because Kaydi's taken something that was pretty much destroyed her, her mental health and her well-being. It took so much away from her, and she's been able to turn that around, not only for herself, but for so many other young people that are going through it. And I'm just so incredibly proud of her, to see where she was and where she is now. And she has worked so hard, for the last year, non-stop. She has worked so hard and had, nothing from it. It's not like she's working and getting a paycheck. It's nothing like that. She's just put so much time and effort into helping others.
I made new friends.
And you made lots of friends, definitely.
You know what I love? What I love about this story is that I've spoken about it a lot. The crippling loneliness that comes with special needs and predominantly autism, when people on the spectrum struggle so terribly to cope and make friends and to sustain friendships. And what I love about Kaydi's adventure and the idea behind Diversified is to reach out and give a place,
give that space,
actual support coming through the charity system directly to the person rather than just information sharing. I love the fact that it's a place where people who are struggling to interrelate with others have a place to go and meet others and say, do you know what? I'm no different to everybody else.
Yeah. No.
Kaydi, I applaud you. I'm so honoured that you joined us and shared your story with us today. I really do. I think you are an absolute inspiration, and I'd call a super special needs
advocate.
Yeah, absolutely. A children's champion is what I would call
you. Absolutely.
Michael, can I ask a question?
Please.
Kaydi, you said you're a real avid reader. Do you write as well? Or do you keep a diary or not?
I think the closest I've gotten to writing anything is trying to make a comic with my friend Megan.
Right, okay. What sorts of books do you like reading?
Mostly fantasy books.
Okay.
Yeah, you like anything that's vampires and werewolves and what else? But Kaydi was reading the newspaper at 4 or 5 year old on the bus to school. So Kaydi's always had an interest in reading. And Kaydi she's so talented in other ways as well. She's an incredible baker. She's incredibly artistic and creative as well. You've got so many things going for you. Like, I'm your mum and I'm biased. But,
well, it's next up world domination, I think, for you, Kaydi. Absolutely.
And she's so modest. You can see it makes her kind of uncomfortable hearing all this praise, but she doesn't realise. I don't think she realises just how much change that she's started to create
and what a difference she's making.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah. And it's just the start of the journey as well. We look forward to. Well, we'll keep track of your story and obviously your track towards becoming a charity, Kaydi. And obviously, once everything's set up, do give us links and we'll make sure we post it all over our website and socials so that more people can find out about you, your story, and the wonderful charity that you're creating. Because as Mike said, it's so needed. These areas where neurodivergent people like yourself can meet, but in a way where it's being run by people who've been there themselves and understand. It's not someone giving something to other people. It's sharing something with other people, and that really sounds like what you're doing. So fantastic.
And can I just say as well that not only, Kaydi, in terms of your specialness, that's come as a strength, loud and clear. But can I also say that you've got a special mum?
Oh,
as
yeah,
well?
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Kathy, you took the words right out of my mouth. I mean, Nicole is what I will often say on Facebook, super mum.
Yeah.
Well done, Nicole. And I got to say, I really would like to invite you back on when you become a charity and tell us. I want to hear more about the journey and what you do, because I feel very passionate about what you do, because I know myself, my own personal experience of working with many people with autism and having a child who is autistic, how lonely it can be. So thank you so much for participating today, Kaydi. And thank you, Nicole. You're both super children champions.
Thank you so much for having us. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, Chris, I mean, really, that was an extraordinary story. I'm like, she's inspirational. I mean, one of the points that I think I've raised it on Facebook before about school doesn't always work for everyone. And the idea that all children should go to school and somehow it's better for them to go to school misses a fundamental number of people like Kaydi. And what she's doing, and the law in relation to it, of course, is that we have to demonstrate in a special needs context, don't we, Charlotte, that a school is inappropriate in order to secure that in one's education healthcare plan. We have to actually demonstrate with evidence that it's inappropriate to educate at the school to be able to get this kind of support through a support plan. Charlotte, that's the Section 61 point.
That is correct, yes.
I mean, and this is the thing, the challenge that creates, and that's what Nicole has experienced. I mean, having to fight that and to argue it and say, well, actually, school is not for me, and it's not working for Kaydi. Kathy, you must have experienced that as a head teacher yourself, working, and you've seen this actually in practice.
Yeah, and interestingly, because of some of the work I do independently, I was involved recently in doing a review for a governing board of a independent school. There was a boarding school, and their uniqueness, if you like, is all about enabling youngsters to learn at their own pace. Now, the parents who send their children there pay, for me, from my background, a phenomenal amounts of money in order to get what basically is almost quite similar for some of the youngsters to what's being described this afternoon. And before I came on this, I had a Zoom with a colleague, and we're going to do an article together, because what worries me is that increasingly in the maintained sector, it's becoming more and more rigid. And there seems to be a correlation between your income and postcode and the sort of education you are able to access free at the point of delivery, which is becoming more and more uniform, rigid, and less willing to accommodate anything other than one particular sort of child clone of each other. And all of the issues that are thrown up to stop youngsters who are anything different to that having a place at a school or being allowed to stay at a school. For example, I've been working with helping a friend do some advocacy for a parent in this area whose son has got sickle cell. Now, the mum chose, very good mum, lots of stuff going on, similar to what Nicole's done. This little boy had no absence problem when he was at primary school, very well behaved little boy. Come secondary, same thing as Nicole was saying, come secondary, they needed to have a school in a particular location, because if he had an episode of sickle cell, they'd be able to get a family member to come and pick him up and keep him safe, because his mum's single mum working. He's in year 9, no school. Every single one's rejected him. They went to the family court, and apologies to the people I'm here with now, but when a judge says from a bench or wherever he sits, what is sickle cell? I mean, I said, just unbelievable. So, the lack of awareness on things that can affect children, be it mental health, being conditions like autism, all that whole spectrum, in addition to other illness-related issues, which are almost treated as if they're inconvenient to schools. It's they can't fit in. We have to make changes around them. We have to adapt too many things. We adapt it for one, we've got to adapt it for others. So let's not do any adaptation. Let's just say that in order to come here, you've got to be a certain cut-out type of student. And that's really, really, as you can understand from, or you can appreciate from what I've said, it's really getting to a number of us. So we're thinking, this needs challenging, and it needs challenging from people with experience of education. We shouldn't be leaving it to, articulate, supportive parents with the aid of lawyers. We should be doing this as professional educators in the field.
Absolutely right. I mean, I was saying in a previous episode, you may see if you actually listen to the links, go to the links. But we were talking to a Senko in a previous episode, weren't we? Saying just this.
Exactly this point, Kathy, really just emphasising how she saw kind of when changing authorities, and in her case, changing from the English to Welsh systems as it happened, although as she acknowledged herself, it's sometimes a postcode lottery, as you mentioned. You move to one local authority, you've got that, and she'd experienced this, she was leading as a deputy head a team of Senkos getting outstanding Ofsteds and really using a kind of compassion-first, child-centric model of supporting these children and keeping them regulated, calm and learning. And then she went to another environment where kind of as a different role, actually coming as a Senko equivalent here in Wales, which is called an ALNCO, and finding quite archaic models of practice, disciplinary action being used in place of therapeutic intervention. And then when raising these concerns, ended up herself being told, one, we don't want to listen, and two, when she then told parents, well, you have to go to the head teacher, I've been told it's nothing to do with me, then face disciplinary action for undermining the head.
It's the failure to adapt.
Yeah, absolutely.
And to understand, and this sort of, as Kathy put it. I mean, Charlotte, we see this often, don't we, in the tribunal system, where there's a lot of emphasis on having to demonstrate, for example, a diagnosis. And unless you get the diagnosis, you don't get the provision. How important do you think, in the context of a special needs tribunal, is a diagnosis? I mean, Kaydi had a terrible trouble getting a diagnosis. It took 10 years.
Yeah, it can be. It's interesting, actually, because I think there's a fair number of judges who, rightly in my view, will say, we're not necessarily concerned about the label. We're going to look at the overall presentation. And if the overall presentation, and this is particularly something I think that you see when you're looking at young people who have autism and also have very good cognitive ability, we're not going to worry too much about the labels. We're going to look at the overall presentation and we're going to match the provision to those needs. But I have occasionally found that you do get some tribunals who say, well, if there is no diagnosis, what do you expect us to do with this effectively? And it can be very frustrating. It can be particularly frustrating, I think, when you've got young people who should, everybody who looks at it says, have you thought of being assessed for X condition or Y diagnosis? And then when they are assessed, you can see that the reason they're not meeting the criteria is because there is a certain amount of maybe stereotyping going on. But people with autism present like this, and therefore, and I find that particularly, I don't know, obviously, because I've only just joined, I don't know if this was Kaydi's experience, but certainly I've found, particularly when you have sort of young women who are very socially adept externally, but for whom that comes at a substantial cost in terms of kind of the emotional burden of having to kind of keep that up and disguise the difficulties that they're having in those environments. Yeah, I mean, it's unbelievably frustrating. It can be very frustrating when you see somebody not getting the help because they seem fine.
Yeah, and funnily enough, Charlotte, I mean, she's very good, isn't she, Mike? Because she's hit the nail on the head. That was exactly Kaydi's presentation, as we discussed just before you joined. She was masking in the environment this, quiet and calm presentation. And again, we see that often, Mike, don't we? Where because the child is no trouble, shall we say, there's that thought of, oh, they must be fine. Whereas, underneath the surface, there's a lot of anxiety, a lot of concern, sometimes a lot of dysregulation that then isn't revealed until they go home, until they can decompress in that environment. And it can be very difficult. I mean, going to the point about, diagnosis and how it unlocks doors, I mean, it's as Charlotte mentioned, very occasionally you can get that at the tribunal level. But I think from my own experience at the tribunal, generally it's quite good. And actually looking at presentation, looking at the symptoms, as it were, not worrying too much about the labels. But the frustrating part is that the tribunal may be good at that, but that's the last resort. It shouldn't wait till that. I find that schools in particular and local authorities, as you say, that it's often some kind of magical key. Like, oh, well, we knew you had sensory difficulties, we knew you had social difficulties, and other types of presentation, but we didn't know you had autism, and now we know you've got autism. Oh, look at all these services you could have. You think, well, what you're now doing is meeting my sensory needs. What you're now doing is meeting my social care need, or my social communication needs, or you're meeting other needs that I exhibit in the classroom. Why on earth did I need a label for you to help me with things you already knew that were going on? And it's incredibly frustrating.
And flexible thinking.
Yes.
The idea that you have to have the diagnosis of, a person with autism might have difficulties with initiating and sustaining social relationships. They will have these difficulties, but does that mean that they don't get any support until the diagnosis comes? It just doesn't make any sense to me. I always believe that one looks at the effect. But I think the problem, and Kathy raised this, and I think it's hit the problem on the head, is that it's all very well for those that we represent, because we may be skilled enough to identify it through the evidence and to help. But teachers on the ground who are seeing this and are asking for change are being cast aside. And in that instance, in the programme before this one, that teacher resigned, and now we've lost the services of a wonderful teacher because of the failure of the profession to adapt. And I think that's what Kathy's talking about. And the aim of these programmes is to reach out to people who may not have the means to instruct people like ourselves, and to try and spread the knowledge. And that's what I love about Kaydi and Nicole's story, is that because you're giving a real life example of someone who didn't fit into the model that is becoming too rigid, as Kathy put it. Yeah. Kathy, is that probably a summary of what?
It was. I was started doing this thinking about it with my colleague, who I mentioned before, and it's one of the problems is that the accountability system, and I have no difficulty about accountability. It's absolutely essential. It's public money, etc. But when the sort of, how would I describe it? When the measure, if you're going to measure schools by GCSE targets, then the measure basically is not a measure anymore, because it's become a target. And then people will game the system in order to provide evidence for their measurements. It's pointless. In fact, he was saying that there was some story he'd heard about some village in India somewhere where they were plagued by particular snakes. So they started giving people, basically, if you took in 10 snakes you killed, then you got some money. So what happened was people started breeding snakes. It's like Stalin's Russia. He had, tonnage of furniture you had to produce as your target. So people started making heavier furniture. So the whole accountability system is skewing how children are being viewed for education. So if you don't fit in so when you go in at 11 years old to a secondary school, if you're not going to fit with they're not going to get the results they need. In some places, by the time they get to 14, when that's become obvious, people are then looking to shed children who don't fit what they need them to be in order to achieve. Now, that's a gross generalisation, but at the heart of it, there is something that's happening in education, that's been happening for the last decade, and we really have to stop it, because what we're doing is creating more and more young people who are losing out, who are basically disaffected, disenfranchised, and disappeared, but they're not disappeared. They're involved in some of the antisocial behaviour going in some cities, in crime and delinquency. And also that impacts on everything. It affects on policing, it affects on housing, it impacts on health. It's actually, if we sort our education it has a massive, it can have a massive effect on all of those other public services.
If you had an opportunity now, and if a member of the government was watching this broadcast on YouTube, for example, what would you say to them needs to change from a legal perspective?
I would say there needs to be some changes in the accountability measures. I would say don't allow the system to become increasingly skewed and lose out on the talent. You know, Kaydi is a very talented young woman. You can hear that. Never mind listening to her more. You can hear that from her. So if you go into somewhere like Silicon Valley, you go into places, and like my eldest son, you know, you meet a load of what, you know, my son calls himself nerds and geeks. And they had, you know, they were not necessarily traditional students. Look at Bill Gates, you know, he dropped out, didn't he? Because he wasn't a traditional student. If we don't allow non-traditional and divergent thinkers to have a place in our system, then we are going to lose out on some of the innovation, some of the creativity, some of the ingenuity, and that will make everybody poorer.
It seems to me, Charlotte, I mean, maybe you press me, what really is being called for is culture change, isn't it, really?
Yeah, absolutely. And a perspective change. I think Kathy hit the nail on the head, and it does reflect a lot of that previous episode we had, where culture and cultural focus within the teaching profession and within the kind of educational framework around teaching is so key. You know, because I think you hit the nail on the head. We could be losing wonderful talents just because. And we are losing wonderful talents because, you know, we aren't, as you say, giving that scope for people to learn differently and to focus on different outcomes. You know, it's not necessarily about the grade on the paper. It can be other outcomes as well, well-being outcomes, other systems and measures to help people thrive in their own way. I think it does sound like a very big task, but it does seem like a change is needed.
But Kathy, I mean, what do you think? Equally, what do you think needs to change in schools to make them more appropriate for people who are struggling?
Oh, well, more humanity, really. You know, I mean, when I was at the head of schools, you know, what would you call me, very strict, because everybody knew it was highly routinized, which is really important. There was a calmness to it, but there was fun. You know, you've got to allow children to be children. You know, having two sons of my own, when you have, you know, 30 or 40 year 10, 14, 16-year-old boys together, somebody will be very stupid. And I'm afraid it doesn't matter what part of the world they come from, you know, they will be silly. And you've got to allow them to be silly. Girls will be different again, but you've got to allow them to have a sense of agency, to have some control over themselves. It doesn't have to be huge amounts. It could, you know, there's all sorts of ways of doing that, but it's just not being rigid, flexing. Because what I used to say was, because sometimes teachers can be a bit of a power dynamic with young people. So I always used to say, especially in the last school, which was in a very, very tough part of Manchester, I would say, no, the person who makes the decision is me. So if there's an argument between a child and a pupil about your hair, then come to me, I'll decide. So there wasn't that sense of control and power, but the children had the respect for the staff as well. And it was mutual respect and regard, whereas seeing them as, you know, sausages coming through your factory, make sure they're stamped properly before they go out, because that gets us our reward in terms of a good Ofsted result or, you know, good press releases or whatever. So it's getting the humanity back, really, irrespective of postcode. It's still there in the independent sector, but people shouldn't have to pay to be treated well.
Absolutely right. Totally agree. Well, before we go, I think we should use the opportunity for Dame Kathy to tell us a little bit about her book. I think, and we'd have to have a link, wouldn't we, on
Oh no, I need actually, Kaydi, I need one of your toys now because I'm feeling anxious.
Yes.
Because I don't like it when people say things, oh, we must hear about your book. I get really nervous.
Tell us a little bit about your book. What are you writing about?
It's called Becoming an Academy with Principal, and Principal is spelled A-L at the end. And it's a story of the last school I ran, which everybody said was going to fail because the behaviour was so atrocious. It had been for many, many years. It was one of the bottom performing schools in the country. And the approach we used in there to improve the school meant that it became outstanding in 5.5 years. Partly that was me being very badly behaved by saying to people, no, we're not going to do it we'll do it my way, thank you very much. I know what I'm talking about. And it was, if I tell you that the benefits of teaching, of making sure young people feel like human beings and not fodder, is that one of the students who was one of the very earliest ones, I'm still in touch with quite a few of them, and one of them was actually, he took time off work to come and sit with me when I was having my chemotherapy 6 years ago.
Oh,
Yeah, he was my chemo buddy. And you know what? Young people, they don't need a huge amount in schools. They just need you to like them, and they just need you to be in place of parent, in place of good parents, not as jailers.
So when is the book
strange ways? Sometime this summer.
Ooh.
I don't know when.
So we can't have it on the links yet.
I don't care if nobody reads it. I've just achieved it.
I will post it when you release it. I'll send the post out.
Yeah, I'm very interested to read it, actually. So you get one reader at least then, Kathy.
Thank you.
Sounds exciting to me.
Now, Charlotte, before we go, because I know you've only come in on the fringe end of this, is there anything that you wanted to add before we wrap up this last episode?
No, I don't think so. Just the bit that I have been in has been extremely interesting. And I just want to wish Kaydi and Nicole a huge amount of luck and good fortune with the initiative that they're doing, which sounds wonderful.
Well, thank you. And thank you all once again for watching. And thank you, Chris.
Thank you very much.
My greatest thanks to Dame Kathy and to Nicole and Kaydi. What wonderful human beings you are. And thanks again to Charlotte, who's joined us at the end of the session. And we look forward to seeing you again soon, where we will catch up, I'm sure, on some more very topical points that we will be talking about on our next edition, which will be probably next month.
Yes.
And so that leaves me only to say, look forward to seeing you again then. And information on Kaydi's charitable organisation will be up on the site here, so you'll be able to see it on the end of this programme. But thank you all for watching, and have a great time.